Welcome, fellow mystery enthusiasts, to the mask that revealed the murderer. Settle in for an evening of psychological intrigue with the incomparable Hercule Poirot, where the deadliest secrets hide behind the most elegant disguises. At Lady Octavia's glittering masquerade ball, masks promised elegant concealment until antiquarian Basil Northcote was found murdered, a black vizard placed ceremoniously upon his face. Only Poirot's little grey cells can unmask this killer. Before we begin this evening of mystery and deduction, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? Masks, mon ami, are the greatest of all deceptions, declared Hercule Poirot, adjusting his pristine white bow tie as he surveyed the glittering assembly before him. They promise to conceal the truth, but in reality, they reveal it most completely. For when a man believes himself hidden, he shows his true nature without restraint. I confess that my friend's philosophical observations about disguise struck me as somewhat excessive, given that we were attending what promised to be one of the season's most delightful entertainments. Lady Octavia Vale's annual masquerade ball at Darnley Court had drawn the cream of society to her magnificent Surrey estate, where the November fog pressed against tall windows like curious spectators, and the warm glow of countless candles transformed the grand ballroom into a stage worthy of the most elaborate theatrical production. "Come now, Poirot," I protested, watching a graceful Columbine glide past in conversation with a distinguished Spanish grandee. "Surely you can appreciate the romance of it all, the mystery, the intrigue. Why, it's positively medieval in its pageantry." Poirot's response was to straighten a slightly askew ribbon on one of the Venetian masks displayed upon a velvet-draped table near the entrance. The collection, on loan from the noted antiquarian Mr. Basil Northcote, included some truly magnificent pieces: a silver domino with fox-like cunning etched into its features, a jester's mask grinning with painted malevolence, and most striking of all, a lacquered black vizard that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his green eyes fixed upon the display. "This ribbon here, it has been retied, and badly. See how the knot sits? It is the work of a left-handed person, and one accustomed to securing things quickly rather than prettily. A sailor's knot, perhaps, or that of someone familiar with other forms of binding." Before I could inquire as to his meaning, our hostess swept toward us in a magnificent gown of crimson silk, her own mask, a masterpiece of peacock feathers and golden thread. Lady Octavia Vale was a woman who commanded attention without effort, handsome rather than beautiful, with intelligent eyes and a laugh that could fill a cathedral. At 52, she possessed that particular confidence that comes from having navigated both society's peaks and its treacherous valleys with equal skill. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed, extending both gloved hands in welcome. "How perfectly splendid that you've come. I confess I had hoped your reputation for solving impossible puzzles might prove useful tonight, though, naturally, I pray we shall have no need of such talents." "Madame is too kind," Poirot replied, executing one of his precise little bows. "Though I observe that even in jest, you speak of puzzles. Perhaps the evening promises more mystery than the mere question of who hides behind which mask." Lady Octavia's laugh carried a note I couldn't quite identify. Was it nervousness, or merely the excitement of a successful hostess? "You are far too perceptive, monsieur, but come. You must meet our other guests. There are several individuals here tonight whose acquaintance I believe you would find illuminating." As she led us deeper into the ballroom, I marveled at the transformation that masks could work upon familiar faces. The room buzzed with an energy that seemed both festive and slightly dangerous, as if the concealment of identity had freed its occupants from the usual constraints of social behavior. Conversations seemed more intense, glances more meaningful, and laughter carried undertones that daylight might have suppressed. Lady Octavia indicated a somber figure, dressed as a cardinal, whose clerical robes sat oddly upon his physician's frame. He has been attending to some delicate matters for several of my guests recently. A most discreet man, though I fear he finds our festivities rather trying. Near the grand fireplace stood a figure in the costume of a Spanish grandee, his bearing suggesting both authority and calculation. Mr. Lionel Drayton, the barrister, our hostess continued, brilliant in court, though some say his methods sail rather close to the wind. He has been handling some complex legal matters for the family. A young woman in silver, her costume that of a woodland nymph, caught my attention as she moved nervously through the crowd. Her companion, a harlequin in green and gold, bent his head to catch her whispered words with evident concern. "My niece, Miss Beatrice Vale, and Captain Alan Kersey," Lady Octavia explained, though her voice carried a slight tension. "Dear Beatrice has been rather unsettled recently. Some financial difficulties, I'm afraid, though we hope they shall soon be resolved. Captain Kersey is most devoted to her, though his own circumstances are not what one might wish for a young man seeking to marry." Poirot's attention had been caught by a figure moving with practiced grace through the crowd. Mr. Basil Northcote himself, resplendent in Pierrot's white costume, his painted smile a curious counterpoint to the calculating intelligence in his dark eyes. "Ah, the collector of beautiful things," Poirot murmured. "Tell me, madame, what is the nature of Monsieur Northcote's business beyond the acquisition of masks and antiquities?" "Basil deals in all manner of precious objects," Lady Octavia replied, though something in her tone suggested the subject was not entirely comfortable. "Paintings, jewels, artifacts of historical significance. He has been most helpful in evaluating certain pieces from my late husband's collection, though I confess, some of his recent propositions have been rather unexpected." Before Poirot could pursue this intriguing comment, the orchestra struck up a waltz, and the room began to reorganize itself around the music. I noticed how the masks seemed to embolden their wearers. Conversations became more animated, gestures more dramatic, and the usual restraints of polite society appeared to loosen with each measure of the dance. "Most fascinating," Poirot observed, his eyes tracking the movement of the guests with scientific precision. "See how the cardinal drinks only lemonade, yet holds his head as one with a severe headache. And observe the Spanish grandee. He watches the ladies with great attention, but his interest in the gentleman is equally keen, though he attempts to conceal it. Small inconsistencies, perhaps, but in my experience, Hastings, it is precisely such small things that reveal the largest truths." As the evening progressed, I found myself drawn into the spirit of the masquerade, dancing with a charming shepherdess and engaging in pleasantly mysterious conversations with masked strangers. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the surface gaiety, currents of tension ran deep. Twice I observed heated exchanges between masked figures who separated quickly when they noticed observation. The black domino from Northcote's collection had disappeared from its display, though I couldn't say when or by whom it had been taken. "The atmosphere grows thick, does it not?" Poirot commented during a brief lull in the festivities. "There is something in the air tonight beyond the scent of roses and candle wax. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. These emotions, they have their own perfume, and it is not pleasant." At 11:30, Lady Octavia announced that supper would be served in the great hall, and the company moved in a colorful procession through corridors lined with portraits of her ancestors. The dining room had been transformed into a scene from a Venetian carnival, complete with grotesque masks adorning the walls and elaborate centerpieces that seemed to watch the diners with painted eyes. During the meal, conversation flowed as freely as the wine. Yet I noticed how certain topics caused sudden silences or swift changes of subject. When Dr. Lyle mentioned a recent case involving forged documents, Mr. Drayton's fork paused halfway to his mouth. When Captain Kersey made a jest about gambling debts, Miss Vale's face went pale beneath her silver mask, and when Lady Octavia praised Mr. Northcote's expertise in authenticating valuable objects, the antiquarian's Smile seemed to freeze upon his painted lips. "Most instructive," Poirot murmured to me as we returned to the ballroom. "Each person here carries secrets, and the masks they wear are the least of their disguises. But secrets, mon ami, they are like pressure in a steam engine eventually. They must find release, or there will be an explosion." As midnight approached, the energy in the room reached a crescendo. Lady Octavia mounted a small dais and raised her champagne flute for attention. "My dear friends," she called out, her voice carrying clearly over the music, "according to our most delightful tradition, we shall unmask at the stroke of 12. When the clock chimes midnight, we shall see who among us has been wise, who has been foolish, and who has been something else entirely." A ripple of anticipation ran through the assembled guests. Hands moved instinctively toward mask strings and ribbons. The orchestra began a dramatic crescendo as the great clock in the hall prepared to strike the hour. But as the first chime echoed through the ballroom, a different sound cut through the air. A woman's scream, sharp and terrified, coming from the direction of the library. The music stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence that followed, we could hear the sound of something heavy falling. Then the unmistakable crash of breaking glass. Poirot was already moving, his small figure cutting through the crowd with surprising speed, and I followed close behind. We found the library door standing open, warm light spilling into the corridor. Inside, chaos reigned. Mr. Basil Northcote lay sprawled behind the great mahogany desk, his white Pierrot costume stained with an spreading crimson bloom. His painted smile had been replaced by an expression of shock and pain, and over his face, placed with what seemed almost ceremonial precision, lay the missing black vizard from his own collection. Its empty eye holes staring at nothing, its lacquered surface reflecting firelight like dark water. Miss Vale stood in the doorway, her silver mask askew, one gloved hand pressed to her mouth in horror. "Doctor," Lyle pushed past her and knelt beside the body, his medical training overriding the shock of the moment. "He's dead," the physician announced grimly, stabbed through the heart a single, precise thrust. "Professional work, I'd say." "Stand back, if you please," Poirot commanded, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Nothing must be disturbed. Hastings, secure the doors. We must ensure that no one leaves until we understand what has occurred here." As I moved to comply, I noticed that the library's French windows stood slightly ajar, their curtains stirring in the November breeze. On the desk, papers were scattered as if there had been a struggle, and a crystal paperweight lay on the floor, though whether it had been used as a weapon or simply knocked over in the altercation, I couldn't say. "The mask," Poirot observed, his green eyes fixed upon the black vizard that covered the dead man's face. "It has been placed there deliberately, with great care. This is not the work of a panicked killer, but of someone who wished to make a statement." "But what statement? And to whom?" Lady Octavia appeared in the doorway, her face pale beneath her peacock feathers. "Dear God," she whispered. "Poor Basil. But who could have done such a thing? And why?" "That, Madame," Poirot replied, his eyes already beginning their methodical examination of the scene, "is precisely what we must discover. For I suspect that this mask, which was meant to conceal the killer's identity, may instead prove to be the very thing that reveals it. The masquerade was over, but the real mystery had only just begun." The clock finished striking midnight as I secured the French windows, noting they stood only slightly ajar, too narrow for easy escape, yet wide enough for someone to have slipped through in desperation. Poirot had already begun his methodical examination, his keen eyes absorbing every detail with the precision of a scientist studying a particularly fascinating specimen. "Nothing more is to be touched until the police arrive," he commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Lady Octavia, if you would be so kind as to telephone Scotland Yard immediately. Until they arrive, everyone must remain in the ballroom. No one departs, No one removes their costume. Dr. Lyle rose from beside the body, his cardinal's robes creating an oddly appropriate scene of last rites. The weapon went straight to the heart, he confirmed quietly, wiping his hands with fastidious precision. A single, precise thrust death would have been almost instantaneous. Whoever did this possessed considerable knowledge of human anatomy. "Indeed, Doctor," Poirot murmured, kneeling to examine the scattered papers without disturbing them. "This speaks not of passion or panic, but of expertise. Tell me, opinion, would such precision require great physical strength?" "Not necessarily. The right angle, proper knowledge of where the ribs part, even a person of modest stature could deliver such a blow if they knew precisely where to aim." Poirot's attention had been caught by a document partially hidden beneath the crystal paperweight that lay fallen beside the desk. Using a letter opener from the side table, he carefully extracted what proved to be an inventory written in Northcote's precise hand, listing various antiques and objets d'art, with values penciled in the margins. One item, Venetian Vizard lacquer, C1700, bore a tiny, distinctive star. "Mademoiselle Val," Poirot said gently, turning to the trembling young woman in the doorway. "It was you who discovered this tragedy." "I came for my wrap," Beatrice whispered, her silver mask now completely askew, revealing tear-streaked cheeks. The corridor was dark, and I saw a figure someone wearing a black mask slip into the library. When I followed, yet the black mask now rests upon Monsieur Northcote's face," Poirot observed thoughtfully. "Most intriguing. This suggests our killer removed their disguise and placed it ceremoniously upon their victim. But why?" Captain Kersey stepped protectively closer to Miss Vale, while Mr. Drayton lingered in the doorway, his barrister's mind already assessing the legal implications of the scene before him. Lady Octavia returned, her earlier composure gradually rebuilding despite the pallor beneath her elaborate peacock mask. "The police have been summoned," she announced. "But surely, Monsieur Poirot, this must be the work of an intruder. Someone who entered through the gardens?" "I think not, madame," Poirot replied, his eyes moving methodically from face to face. "Consider the killer possessed intimate knowledge of this house, knew precisely where to find Monsieur Northcote alone, and understood enough of human anatomy to strike with lethal accuracy. Non, our murderer walks among us still, hidden behind mask and costume, believing themselves safe in their disguise. But masks, as I observed earlier this evening, have a curious way of revealing more than they conceal." Poirot moved closer to Miss Vale, his voice gentle yet precise. "Mademoiselle, this figure you observed, can you tell me anything more specific about their movements?" "They pushed the door with their left hand," she whispered, still trembling. "I noticed, because it seemed awkward, the way they reached across, and they were of medium height, no taller than poor Mr. Northcote himself." "Most observant," Poirot murmured, then glanced meaningfully at the pristine Aubusson carpet beneath the French windows. I followed his gaze and understood immediately not a single damp footprint marked the pale surface, despite the November fog pressing against the glass outside. Dr. Lyle approached us, having shed his cardinal's outer robes. "Monsieur Poirot, I feel compelled to mention that Northcote had been experiencing considerable anxiety recently. He consulted me several weeks ago regarding insomnia and nervous complaints." "Indeed. And the source of these troubles?" "He spoke of concerns about authenticity, whether certain pieces in his collection were genuine. For a man whose reputation depends upon expertise, such doubts can be devastating. He feared someone might be using his name to authenticate forgeries." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Forgeries? That would indeed provide motive most compelling for blackmail, perhaps, or murder to silence an inconvenient expert." The sound of motor cars announced Scotland Yard's arrival. Inspector Japp's familiar figure appeared in the doorway, his weathered face taking in the costumed assembly with professional gravity, tinged by wry amusement. "Well, Poirot," Japp announced, removing his hat. "Another puzzle for us to unravel, I see. Right then, nobody leaves. Nobody removes their costume until we've had proper statements." "But of course, Inspector," Poirot replied, his green eyes moving thoughtfully from face to face among the masked suspects. "Though I suspect our killer believes their disguise still protects them. How wrong they shall prove to be." Inspector Japp dispatched constables to secure all exits, while Poirot requested a methodical examination of each suspect. The morning room became an impromptu interview chamber, where masks created an almost theatrical atmosphere that seemed to heighten every nervous gesture and hesitant response. Mr. Drayton, still resplendent in his Spanish grandee costume, proved remarkably composed. "I was in conversation with Lady Octavia near the conservatory when we heard the scream," he stated firmly. Yet when Lady Octavia was questioned separately, she shook her head with admirable honesty. "No, Mr. Drayton. I was quite alone on the dais during the unmasking announcement." Poirot's keen eyes had already noted the faint smear of ink at the base of Drayton's left thumb, as though from hastily pocketed documents. The barrister's mask ribbon bore the same awkward, left-handed knotwork that had caught Poirot's attention earlier on the display table. Dr. Lyle's testimony painted him as a reluctant participant. I retreated to the smoking room around 11:30 to avoid the festivities. Large gatherings try my nerves considerably, yet his remarkably swift appearance at the crime scene suggested medical instincts finely tuned to emergencies. Miss Vale's account proved most revealing. "I had hoped to discuss a small loan with Uncle Basil. My circumstances have become rather desperate recently." Her financial distress provided compelling motive, yet her genuine horror at discovering the body seemed beyond theatrical capability. Captain Kersey confirmed his devoted attention to Miss Vale throughout the evening, though he admitted losing sight of her briefly before midnight. Lady Octavia's testimony proved most intriguing. Basil had been acting strangely all evening, constantly checking his pocket watch. He mentioned expecting an important visitor, someone who understood the true value of masks. "The authentication of valuable objects," Poirot murmured thoughtfully, "creates such delicate balances between fortune and ruin. And our killer, Inspector, believes their mask still conceals them. How very wrong they shall prove to be." The interrogation continued as dawn broke through the tall windows, casting pale light across the weary faces of our assembled suspects. Inspector Japp, his practical mind already forming conclusions, had focused his attention squarely upon Mr. Lionel Drayton, whose composed demeanor now struck him as suspiciously detached. "Mr. Drayton," Japp began, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated evidence. Miss Vale described the assailant as using their left hand to push open the library door. "We've also noted the distinctive knot on your mask ribbon, quite clearly the work of a left-handed person." Poirot, who had been studying the scattered papers with characteristic intensity, looked up with sudden interest. "Ah, Inspector, you raise a most fascinating point. Perhaps we might conduct a small experiment?" He produced an unused mask from Lady Octavia's collection. "Would each of you be so kind as to demonstrate how you secured your mask this evening? For the official record, you understand." One by one, the suspects complied. Captain Kersey produced a neat sailor's knot with his right hand, his military training evident in the precise movements. Dr. Lyle fussed over symmetry, also favoring his right hand. Miss Vale fumbled nervously, beginning with her left hand, before switching when the ribbon slipped through her trembling fingers. When the mask reached Drayton, he hesitated for the briefest moment before reaching across with his left hand, producing the same distinctive, hurried knot that Poirot had observed earlier on the display table. "Most illuminating," Poirot murmured, though his tone suggested something beyond mere satisfaction with the demonstration. Japp's eyes had narrowed considerably. Left-handed, lied about his alibi. ink stains on his thumb suggesting recent document handling, and Lady Octavia's testimony contradicting his whereabouts. "Mr. Drayton, I'm afraid you'll need to remain under guard while we continue our investigation." For the first time, the barrister's composure cracked visibly. "I advise nothing without my solicitor present," he snapped. Then, catching himself, added with brittle civility, "The ink is easily explained. I reviewed a deed earlier this evening concerning Lady Octavia's trust. Left-handedness is hardly a criminal offense, Inspector." "No, monsieur," Poirot agreed mildly. "It is not. Yet consider the theater of this crime. Our assassin has arranged every detail with meticulous care." He gestured toward the library, where the black visage still rested upon Northcote's face with ceremonial precision. "Too careful, perhaps. One almost wishes us to look to the left." As a constable led Drayton away for further questioning, Poirot made one final discovery that caused him to pause with evident interest. Hidden beneath the desk blotter lay a half-completed letter in Northcote's elegant script. "My dear colleague, I fear our arrangement has become untenable. The forgeries you commissioned have been discovered, and I can no longer authenticate pieces I know to be false." "Blackmail," Japp concluded with satisfaction. Northcote discovered Drayton's involvement in some forgery scheme and threatened exposure. The lawyer silenced him before he could talk. Yet Poirot's expression remained thoughtful, his green eyes moving from the letter to the precisely placed mask, then to the French windows where morning light revealed no trace of an intruder's passage. "Perhaps, mon ami," he said quietly, his words barely audible above the ticking of the great clock. "But my little grey cells whisper that something here is not quite orderly. The simplest explanation is not always the correct one. Sometimes, the most obvious path is merely a cleverly laid trap, and our true murderer walks among us still, believing their mask of innocence remains intact." Despite Inspector Japp's satisfaction with the case against Drayton, Poirot remained in the library, his expression troubled by an indefinable sense of disorder. His keen eyes moved from the precisely placed black visage to the scattered papers, then to the French windows where morning light revealed no trace of an intruder's passage. "The evidence against Monsieur Drayton," he murmured to me. "It fits too perfectly, like a puzzle with pieces cut to specification. In my experience, Hastings, real crimes are messier affairs, full of inconsistencies and human fallibility. This arrangement suggests a mind that wishes us to reach a particular conclusion." He approached the visage with scientific precision, bending close without disturbing its ceremonial placement. "Most interesting," he observed, inhaling delicately. "Fresh mastic and lampblack, this mask has been recently polished with considerable care. Whoever handled it after such polishing would carry traces of its distinctive perfume." Dr. Lyle, who had remained to assist with the medical examination, looked up from his notes with evident concern. "Monsieur Poirot, I must share an observation that troubles me greatly. The wound's angle and depth suggest our killer possessed both anatomical knowledge and considerable upper body strength. Yet, Miss Vale described someone moving awkwardly with their left hand, most peculiar for a person's dominant side." "You suggest deliberate deception, Doctor." "Precisely. The awkwardness she observed indicates someone using their weaker hand intentionally, perhaps to mislead witnesses about their true dexterity." Poirot's attention was caught by something that had escaped. Earlier, notice a lady's glove of fine kid leather lying partially concealed beneath the desk's shadow. Too small for any gentleman present, its presence near the body seemed incongruous with the accounts given. Lady Octavia appeared at that moment, her exhaustion evident despite her attempts at composure. "Monsieur Poirot, I've found something rather disturbing among Basil's effects." She produced a leather notebook filled with meticulous observations in Northcote's precise handwriting. The entries revealed systematic concerns about authentication and provenance. One passage, dated merely 3 days prior, proved particularly illuminating. "The Vale collection, several pieces of questionable origin. authentication impossible until proper provenance established. Someone has been most clever in their deceptions. Poirot called. If you would be so kind as to request gloves from our remaining guests. The mastic residue should provide most instructive evidence. Examination proved revealing. Dr. Lyle's gloves remained spotless. Miss Vale's showed only faint powder traces, but Captain Kersey's right glove bore a distinct dark smear along its cuff. And how, Captain, did this staining occur? Japp inquired with renewed interest. Kersey colored visibly. Earlier this evening, Northcote asked me to help adjust the display. Something about the sightlines from the ballroom. My sleeve must have brushed against the freshly polished pieces. Lady Octavia frowned with evident confusion. But, Captain, I gave no such instructions. The footmen were quite capable of arranging the exhibits to my specifications. It was merely a moment's assistance, Kersey insisted, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Poirot studied the assembled faces with characteristic intensity, noting the subtle shifts in expression, the nervous gestures, the way each person's mask of composure revealed more than it concealed. Miss Vale watched Captain Kersey with an intensity that suggested more than mere concern, while Lady Octavia possessed a brittle quality that seemed forced rather than natural. The evidence accumulates, Poirot observed quietly, yet it points in directions that seem to contradict one another. We have a left-handed killer who may be right-handed, a precisely placed mask that suggests premeditation, and motives that multiply rather than clarify with each revelation. He turned to Inspector Japp with renewed purpose. I propose, mon ami, a small reconstruction. Let us return each person to their claimed position at the stroke of midnight, recreate the exact circumstances of the crime. Sometimes the scene itself can correct the imperfect memories of men and reveal the truth that lies beneath the most carefully constructed deceptions. The reconstruction proved more illuminating than Inspector Japp had anticipated. As each suspect took their claimed position in the dimmed ballroom, the physical impossibilities of their testimonies became starkly apparent. Poirot's methodical timing revealed that Miss Vale's journey from the ballroom to the library, at a lady's measured pace, required precisely 15 seconds. Yet, Captain Kersey claimed to have reached her side within moments of her scream, despite being positioned near the distant conservatory. Most instructive, Poirot observed, guiding Miss Vale to demonstrate the awkward left-handed door push she had witnessed. This gesture you describe reaching across the body to push with the left hand, when the door's natural mechanics favor the right. Such awkwardness suggests deliberate deception. Or perhaps, he paused, examining the door's polished brass handle with characteristic precision, a right hand occupied with something requiring careful handling. Lyle stepped forward with evident concern. The mastic residue we discovered earlier would transfer easily from a freshly polished mask to gloves, then to any surface touched. Subsequently, Captain Kersey's stained glove places him in direct contact with the display pieces. Indeed, Doctor, yet observe Captain Kersey's positioning during our reconstruction too distant to have reached Miss Vale so quickly, unless he possessed prior knowledge of events about to unfold. Poirot's keen gaze moved from face to face, noting the subtle shifts in expression, the nervous gestures that no mask could conceal. Lady Octavia moved restlessly near the French windows, her earlier composure now entirely abandoned. This is becoming quite unbearable, she whispered, though her voice carried across the silent room. Poor Basil is dead, and we stand here playing games while his murderer. She stopped abruptly, as Poirot's attention fixed upon her with sudden intensity. Madame, you speak of games, yet the greatest game of all has been the authentication of your late husband's collection. Tell me, when did you discover that several pieces were clever forgeries? Silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant ticking of the great clock that had marked the moment of murder. Lady Octavia's elegant composure crumbled like ancient parchment, her peacock feathers trembling as she gripped the window frame. 3 weeks ago, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning breeze. Basil informed me that several pieces from my late husband's collection would not withstand serious scrutiny. He promised discretion, claimed he needed time to research proper authentication methods. Yet his notebook suggests growing alarm rather than scholarly patience, Poirot observed gently. The financial implications of such discoveries would be considerable, non? Dr. Lyle stepped forward with evident concern. Lady Octavia consulted me recently about severe anxiety attacks. She mentioned mounting pressures, fears about her husband's legacy being questioned. The insurance valuations alone, Inspector Japp added with dawning comprehension. If the collection proved fraudulent, the policies would be voided. Complete financial ruin. Miss Vale moved protectively toward her aunt, her silver costume catching the pale light. The estate's debts are considerable without the collection's value to secure them. Poirot knelt beside the mysterious glove beneath the desk, his movements precise and deliberate. This glove, Madame kid leather of finest quality, yet belonging to none of our ladies present. Most curious. And observe the faintest trace of lamp black upon the fingertips, suggesting recent contact with freshly polished surfaces. At that moment, Inspector Japp emerged from the library, holding singed paper fragments with evident excitement. Poirot, we've discovered something in the grate partially burned, but still legible. He unfolded the charred remnants carefully. Change of plan. Come before 12. Use the black mask. Ah, Poirot murmured, his green eyes brightening with sudden understanding. So, our victim expected a visitor, someone who possessed both intimate knowledge of the evening's arrangements and access to the mask collection. The plot, as they say, grows thicker. Lady Octavia's face had gone ashen. Basil mentioned a private meeting at midnight. Someone who understood the true value of masks, he said. I assumed he meant another collector. Perhaps, madame, or perhaps someone who understood that masks reveal more than they conceal, including the desperation of those who wear them. Poirot examined the burned correspondence with characteristic precision, his keen eyes studying the elegant letterpress that spoke of expensive stationery and careful planning. Most illuminating, Inspector. This note suggests not spontaneous violence, but calculated arrangement, someone who possessed both intimate knowledge of the household and access to the mask collection. At that moment, a constable approached Inspector Japp with evident urgency. Sir, the footman hails, confirms Mr. Drayton was at the telephone alcove precisely at midnight, still conducting business when Miss Vale's scream echoed through the corridors. Impossible for him to have committed the murder and arranged the scene. Japp's expression shifted as this alibi eliminated their primary suspect. Poirot's attention, however, had returned to Lady Octavia with gentle but inexorable purpose. Madame, your gloves, if you would be so kind. She produced only her left glove from her reticule, her composure finally cracking. The other was misplaced during the evening's confusion. Yet the glove beneath the desk is for the right hand, Poirot observed softly, noting the faint traces of lamp black upon her fingertips. Finest kid leather, matching your own, and these dark traces from handling freshly polished masks, perhaps? Captain Kersey stepped protectively closer to Miss Vale, his instinctive movement revealing more than words could convey about the evening's true dynamics and the desperate measures love might inspire. Lady Octavia's composure crumbled completely as she stared at the delicate glove in Poirot's hands. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning breeze. I went to him before midnight. He sent word earlier, asking me to come quietly, to bring the black mask. He spoke of scandal, of complete exposure, not merely the forgeries, but the insurance fraud, the falsified provenance documents my husband had created over decades. Poirot studied the glove with characteristic precision, noting how its elegant proportions matched perfectly with Lady Octavia's remaining glove. And this glove? Madam? You removed it to handle the freshly polished mask, perhaps, and it fell when you departed in haste. Basil was alive when I left him, Lady Octavia insisted, tears streaming down her cheeks. Agitated. Yes, threatening ruin, but alive. I begged for time, for discretion, but he was adamant about his moral obligations. Before Inspector Japp could respond, Captain Kersey stepped forward with military bearing, his face set with grim determination. I accompanied Lady Octavia to that meeting, he announced clearly. She arranged it, yes, but when Northcote refused all reasonable appeals, when he threatened to destroy not only her reputation but Miss Vale's inheritance as well, I delivered the fatal blow. Lady Octavia fled immediately. She couldn't bear to witness such violence. Miss Vale gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. Alan, no! You cannot sacrifice yourself. I can and I must, Kersey replied firmly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. My military training provided the anatomical knowledge for such precision. Lady Octavia faced complete ruin, and her niece would inherit nothing but debts and scandal. I could not allow such injustice to an innocent young woman I hoped to marry. The room fell silent except for Miss Vale's quiet sobs and the distant ticking of the great clock. Inspector Japp moved toward Kersey with evident satisfaction at this clear resolution. But Poirot raised one small, precise hand. Most noble. Captain, Poirot observed, his green eyes moving thoughtfully between Kersey's determined confession and the evidence scattered before them. Your chivalrous impulse to protect the ladies does you credit. Yet I fear this gallant sacrifice obscures certain inconsistencies that my little grey cells find most disturbing. The truth, I suspect, wears yet another mask, one we have not yet removed. Poirot's objection hung in the morning air with quiet authority. Captain, your gallantry does you credit, yet consider the physical impossibilities of your confession. The wound's upward angle suggests a shorter assailant, striking a taller victim, not a military man of your stature delivering a downward blow. Moreover, the ceremonial placement of the black vizard speaks of someone who understood masks as symbols, not mere disguises. Inspector Japp frowned, his satisfaction beginning to waver. But the confession explains the motive, the opportunity. Indeed, Inspector. Yet Miss Vale's observation of the awkward left-handed door push suggests deliberate misdirection by someone naturally right-handed. A military man would never choose such an unnatural movement unless attempting deception. But why such elaborate theater if one intends immediate confession? Doctor, Lyle stepped forward with evident discomfort. Monsieur Poirot, I must share something, Northcote confided. He spoke of family pressure regarding authentication, someone with desperate financial circumstances who understood his work intimately enough to forge provenance documents. Poirot's keen gaze moved to Miss Vale, whose silver mask now hung completely askew, revealing a face transformed by emotions far more complex than grief. Her earlier trembling had ceased, replaced by a stillness that seemed almost predatory. You see, mes amis, Poirot murmured with absolute certainty. We have been observing the wrong performance entirely. The true murderer has been hiding behind the most effective mask of all innocence itself. Miss Vale's silver mask slipped from nerveless fingers as Poirot's gentle but inexorable logic stripped away her carefully constructed deception. The trembling victim dissolved, replaced by someone whose calculating intelligence had been hidden behind theatrical vulnerability throughout the evening. The wound's upward angle matches your height precisely, mademoiselle, Poirot continued with quiet certainty. Your medical studies with Dr. Lyle provided the anatomical knowledge for such precision. The awkward left-handed door push you described was deliberate misdirection. A right-handed person would indeed push thus if their dominant hand clutched a weapon. Doctor, Lyle stepped forward with dawning comprehension. The silver powder on your costume, it matches the dusting beneath the black vizard's fresh polish. You handled the mask carefully, yet traces remained. Most conclusive, Poirot observed, is your intimate knowledge of authentication methods, your access to Northcote stationery for forging that burned note, and your desperate financial circumstances. When Monsieur Northcote threatened to expose the collection's fraudulent provenance, you arranged the midnight meeting, struck with calculated precision, then staged the scene to implicate others. Miss Vale's composure crumbled completely. "He would have ruined everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Aunt Octavia, Alan, our entire future." "Ah, mademoiselle," Poirot replied sadly, "you chose to destroy another's future instead. That is the terrible arithmetic of murder.